yes.
Oh, I missed that. I didn't see
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
It's
it's
great.
good. Yeah.
It's Vet Partners post. It's classic.
Okay, so I'm a little behind from today. I've been doing a lot of writing.
Yeah.
Okay, we are top of the hour, so I'm going to do as we always hold true to. So I think we've got a lot of familiar faces on here. We may have one or two new ones. So first of all, everyone, welcome to the Bridge Club. We just are coming off of one heck of a really boisterous time that we've had at the Bridge Club. We hosted 5 sessions in 5 days for veterinary technicians, and so now this is our topic to get back up to everybody, so everyone's engaged in it. So I want to do a couple things before, as we start to get started today. If there was a reason you signed up for this particular Bridge Club, keep that in your mind, because we do want to make sure that as we go through it, that we're getting your questions answered. And there was a reason you wanted to sign up for it, other than the fact that you love Deb and you absolutely think she's amazing, because she is.
Totally.
We want to be sure that if there was something in particular you wanted to dive into, this is your opportunity. Hey, Kimberly, how are you?
Hi, I finally got the video working.
Oh, good.
Hey, Karen. Okay, love it, love it. So
Perseverance.
I love that, and that's all we ask for. So what we are going to be doing is I want everyone to go ahead and grab your beverage. We're going to turn this over to Debra Hamilton. We're going to start with the toast, then I'll have Debra give a little bit on who she is, for those of you who are not familiar. And then we're going to just dive right on in, people, because this is such an amazing topic to talk about how to ease tensions. So to our illustrious host, Debra, I turn it to you.
So the toast that I've come up with is, when you notice tensions are rising, you can sometimes feel as if you're on fire. Remember to stop, drop, and roll. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, all.
And that will come to be understood why I use that as a toast. Catherine knows because she cheated, because we talked last night, but you'll understand why that is later on.
Love it.
So I just want to say how grateful I am to be a part of this wonderful Bridge Club. And to give you a very brief background, I am an attorney here in New York. I was an assistant district attorney and an assistant inspector general for 13 years. I took 13 years off to take care of my kids. 13 seems to be my lucky number. And I learned a great deal being a PTA mother, and that was, I learned how to play nicely in the sandbox, which didn't serve me very well when I went back to litigating, because I always wanted to talk to people. And I wanted to try to work it out without suing, so it was not really effective. So I decided in 2010, when I opened my litigation firm again in 2008, 2010, I decided to open this really weird firm called Hamilton Law and Mediation, and it only handles conflicts between people over animals. That's it. That's all I do. My husband thought the niche was a little small. So all of you know that animals are very important in people's lives. So think about where animals impact your lives. So veterinary medicine, of course, when they get sick, you have veterinary medicine, but also in divorce, landlord-tenant, trust and estates, all sorts of civil lawsuits, all sorts of criminal lawsuits for abuse. So animals impact everywhere in the law. And if you address it in mediation and have a conversation, it sometimes is worked out so much better than if you litigate right off the bat. And that's been my experience. So I've started this practice. I'm actually the stellar star at the Restorative Justice Group, because they'd never thought about using restorative justice for conflicts that involve animals. And now they're having me teach a course on it, because they usually just did the juvenile school to prison pipeline. Now they're doing the animal abuse. And of course, most of you know about Phil Arkow's Link Coalition. If you don't, you should. That's where Phil has done studies about the circle. So the circle starts with animal abuse, usually then goes to child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse. So if we can nip it in the bud, the name of my book, Nipped in the Bud, not in the Butt. If we can nip it in the bud and get children and young adults who abuse children and start to really reform and restore them, it'll be much better. But anyway, I'm here to help veterinarians and their techs and everyone else. I thought it was great that we're doing techs too, because techs usually get this much better than the veterinarians. There's a little bit of ego going on in there. So, but to resolve conflicts that happen between clients and staff and colleagues. So Catherine, do you need to step in now, or am I supposed to take it away?
So you start to jump right in. So we've got this broken into 2 parts tonight,
We do.
guys. So we're going to go part 1, then we're going to stop and ask some questions. We'll go into part 2, and then we'll just go for a free-for-all. But this is to kind of help us kind of jump in with part number 1. So go for it.
Okay, so part number 1, I love teaching people via wordsmithing or having mnemonics in order to remember things. I just got back from the International Boarding and Pet Sitting Conference where I did the keynote, and at it I gave them these 2. The first one will be the first 5 to 7 minutes. The second one will be the second. So the first one is, write this down, AKA. That's A as in apple, K as in kite, A as in apple. Because when you are in conflict with someone, and you can remember to do AKA, that conflict will resolve as quickly as possible, if possible. So the first A stands for address the conflict. I just had a client, a prospective client, call this afternoon. She goes, well, I just got this letter, you know, from an owner who's upset about the dog. And she said, should I write to them? Should I ignore it? I said, the most important piece here is to address the conflict up front. Ask for information and then listen. So A is for address the conflict. If they write you a letter, say, thank you, Mrs. Smith, for letting me know. I'm putting this through proper protocol and I look forward to working this out with you in the near future, period. 3 sentences. Because you want to acknowledge that you received it. Most people don't acknowledge. They don't address it. They want to, you know, it'll go away. If I don't address it, it'll go away. It doesn't go away, especially conflicts over animals or conflicts with staff members in an animal environment, doesn't go away. The second one is K. Decide whether or not you're going to keep that staff member, that colleague, or that client. If you are, it's much cheaper. Just want to let you know that. Much cheaper to keep a client, keep a staff member, than fire them, because it's hard to get another client and it's hard to really bring somebody in and train, but you'll know whether or not that party should be kept or let go. The one thing you want to do is, if you let them go, don't send them away angry, because that can really impact your practice in a way you can't even begin to imagine. We have social media now. I know none of you have had any issues or known anyone who's had any issues with social media, but sometimes owners or colleagues put things up on social media that may not be flattering about your practice. And I just got back from the ABA Animal Law conference, and in it they had 4 defense attorneys for insurance companies speak about something else. So we, of course, were having cocktails, like now.
Of course.
And I asked them, I said, what do you do when your veterinarians get a bad review on Yelp or Facebook? And they go, we tell them to ignore it. I said, really? And how does that work for the vet? I know how it works for you, but how does that work for the vet? And they go, well, it takes a month or 2, sometimes 6 months for it to go away, but we tell them, don't bother to address it at all. And have your good clients write better reviews above it so it goes down the trail. And I'm like, yeah, that's really good advice. Do not take that advice. What you want to do is you really want to make sure that if you decide to let a client go, that you do it in a way that respects where they are and how they feel. It doesn't mean you agree. You acknowledge and appreciate. That's what the other A is. You acknowledge and appreciate how they feel. That doesn't mean you agree. However, it gives you the opportunity to hear what might have gone wrong, what you might have done differently, what you did perfectly right and they're just crazy. It's okay. Whatever road, whatever path you want to take, you acknowledge and appreciate how they feel. Because what really affects everyone in discussions in conflict is perception and perspective. So the way I see something when I say it or when I hear it could be totally different than the way Brenda's going to hear it or see it or feel it. And if you can take a minute to realize, you know, they're just not getting me the way I'd like them to get me, that's okay. It doesn't matter. What really matters is making sure that you appreciate and acknowledge where they are and either keep them or let them go. So that's AKA. And it really gives you the opportunity to be proactive about conflicts that arise. You could use this in your life as well, but I digress. You can use it in your practice, because you really, most conflicts come, and I don't know, we'll ask these questions later on, but isn't it true, and maybe if you want to jump in here, isn't it true that most conflicts come because you've avoided addressing it? It'll go away. They'll get over it. Oh, they must have had a bad day. I actually spoke to a group of staff in a big vet practice, and one of the girls stood up and said, you know, I should really identify when I come in with my cranky pants on. She said, because then everybody will know that I might just not be saying or doing what I'd like to do because I've had a bad drive to the office. All of these things impact your staff and your client. So recognizing they may have their cranky pants on, I told her I would be using that going forward, is an identifiable that you can use to make sure that you understand people are not themselves. And, you know, maybe it is time to say, Catherine, what's going on? Because I see that you're very agitated today. Please let me know what's going on. And usually they will tell you, unless it's something personal, and then they'll say nothing. And then you might want to check in on them later on, because if they're usually a really great client, you'll be able to know. Catherine, how am I doing on time?
You're doing fantastic. So I'm going to go with the first, like, open up for questions. And one of the questions that we do have here is the idea of, like, okay, so you have to address the conflict. But so I come from the corporate world, and in the corporate world, you get the most senior person to come in and address the conflict when something's happening. Who's supposed to address the conflict?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. And whoever posted it, or if you made it up, that's really great. The best person to address the conflict is usually the veterinarian. I know that in the protocol of vet management, they sometimes have the front desk or the general manager or someone else address the conflict. I have to say, in my practice, that really pisses off the pet owner. And it really pisses off the staff member, because they usually have the disagreement with either that staff member or the vet. And they really want to talk to the person in charge. And I know that it isn't really a strong skill in veterinary medicine to be able to address conflicts in your practice. But truly, the buck stops there. And if you really want to stop conflicts from escalating in your practice, you really need to handle it, not your front desk people. You can have them run interference, but if it really isn't resolving, you need to step in and you need to address it and then listen to what they're saying, the other party, staff.
So Deborah, what if the most senior person, the veterinarian or the practice owner, or say in the case of the corporate world, the most senior person on the chain there, what if that person is a part of the conflict? Then what?
Well, that's usually the case, which is why they want to avoid it. I mean, they're usually the ones who are precipitating and usually the front desk people are, you know, running as fast as they can in the wheel to keep the wheels on the bus, because the person who's in charge may be the person who's creating the havoc. Well, that's when you sit down with someone and have a conversation. You sort of have an intervention. If you have a boss, or you have a veterinarian or a staff leader who is creating a little bit of angst, the people need to, and I mean the people in the entire practice, including the vet, because sometimes I've been involved with vet practices where the vets are afraid to talk to the front desk people because the front desk people are in charge. And they sit there and they go, well, this is really ridiculous. You're having people leave, staff or clients, because the front desk people are nightmare, but you're afraid to address it. No, you really have to have the process in place, if you're a good leader, to enable people to have this conversation to address it. I always say, if you don't have a suggestion box that you address every single week, then you're missing out on a lot of great information that could change your practice, both for the better and, you know, innovative things that could come up as well. So to answer your question, 10 minutes. To answer your question, you really need to make sure that you have the ability to address conflicts, even if you are the conflict. And in fact, you should make sure that you always have something that's going to address the conflict if you're the conflict, and don't have people be afraid. So the second piece, I just got my 10 minutes. The second piece of this would be, and this is drum roll please, why we had our toast. The next one you write down, stop, drop, and roll. This is my patented, not really, but I would if I could, statement, because you want to stop talking and listen. Something I'm not very good at, but I do get good at it in mediation. When you're in the middle of a conflict, ask a question and then shut up. In my mediations, I usually put duct tape on the table because I'm into that stuff. No, not really. But I get the ones with the animals on it, and it creates that ability to talk in a funny way about not interrupting and about the fact that I'm not here to solve your problem. So what I say is I have this duct tape on the table because I want to make sure that I don't tell you what to do. And I have it here so that you don't interrupt the other party when they're talking. So either figuratively or literally, if you want to interrupt when Brenda's talking, take a piece of tape and slap it over your mouth. Or do it figuratively, that would be much better. But you have to stop talking. You have to just ask the question and say, Kim, what really is going on here? What's going on? I feel like there is some sort of discord. Tell me about what's going on, and then shut up. The other word you want to leave out of your vocabulary when you stop talking and listening is the word but. Write a big circle, put but in the center, and draw a line across it. Because anything you say after but deletes all the great things you said before but. Because if I say, Brenda, you told me this great information. I'm so glad you told it to me. I'm so glad you let me know about this situation. But you could have told me about it earlier. Gone. Everything I said that was peaceful and peacemaking is gone because I said but. The second thing, which is the hardest thing for all professionals, how many people on this call consider themselves a professional? All of us. Drop the need to be right. Mm-hmm. Drop the need to be right. I always tell people, Kim Kahodak knows this because I talked to her a million times about this. So you got to drop the need to be right because you are. You are. You're right. I mean, you're right. So why do you need to fight with Jeff about why you're right? Just listen to why he thinks he's right. And when you're listening to him about why he thinks he's right, instead of listening to reply and respond, listen for commonality. Listen to where you can say, Jeff, I just heard you say 3 things. Let me reflect them back to you because I want to make sure I got them right. You like that people come on time. So do I. I think that's a really great point. And you like when people stay late. So do I. And you like when people talk to the clients in a way that's really effective and informational. And so do I. So those are 3 things we have in common. Now you have these other 3 things that we're having a little bit of issue about, but I'm so glad that we know we're on the same page on these 3 things. Because then when you talk about that stuff you don't like, you've already established that you are on the same page in these 3 places. And even if you're just on the same page that you woke up this morning or the sun came out, that's better than not being on the same page at all. I mean, truthfully, just say, we all love animals. I'm trying to get the AKC to talk to HSUS because I'm crazy. But I said, well, let's start with we all love animals. I said, and go from there because that's a commonality. Mm-hmm. And the last piece, so you have stop talking and listen, drop the need to be right, right? And these you can put up in your office and nobody will know what it means except you. And so you'll have this visual cue and you'll hear my voice in your head and you'll be like, because I have a lot of vets who come to me and say, Debra, it's driving me nuts. I hear your voice in my head because I've spoken at conferences and I go, did you break up the fight? She go, yeah. I said, great, it works. So let what they say roll off your back. Sticks and stones will break my bones and names will never hurt me. But I have found that if you don't respond with that word but, if you just respond and reflect back, and Jeff will hold this out as truthful because I know when I went to his program at VMX, he taught these kind of things. If you reflect back what they say, but not in a condescending way, try not to do that. If you reflect back what they say, they're going to say, okay, yeah, that's what I mean. And if they say things that are terrible to you and really mean you killed my dog, you hurt my dog, you made me pay too much, say, I hear you. this was a really difficult situation for you. And I hear everything you say that's really important to you and to this whole situation. When they call you all sorts of names like a quack and incompetent and all the rest of that stuff, let it go. Don't try to defend yourself. You can't, they can't hear you. They're on a roll. I mean, how many of you have been in a conflict with a client over a dog? And if you ever tried to tell them something that was factual, they would argue with you because they're on a roll. You're just wrong, period. So don't even, just let it roll off your back. And what I have found is if you do, you have not added fuel to the fire. They can't say, well, you know, Brenda, you said this. When I was telling you about, you said this, so you haven't added fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
And you've given them the opportunity then to go home and think about what they said. And I've had several vets come up to me and say, I did not believe you when you said this, but it was true. They go home and talk to their spouse and tell their spouse what they said to the vet. And the spouse makes them come back the next day to apologize. Because they had an out-of-body experience. You're talking about their child. You're talking about their kid. So if you let what they say roll off your back, you don't feel it. They sometimes, often, I know, come home, come back and apologize. So let's see, what have we learned here today? Because that's what I'm here for. AKA, which is, you know, from my old ADA days, because it's also known as Mary Smith, Mary Jones, Mary Belafonte. You know, everybody has 5 names. Address the conflict. Decide whether or not you're going to keep the staff or client. And if you are going to keep them, make sure you send them away happy. And I don't mean money, but that's a whole nother discussion. Mm-hmm. And appreciate and acknowledge does not mean you agree. So those are the first 3. The second 3 are stop, drop, and roll. Stop talking and listen. Drop the need to be right. You are. You are. And let what they say roll off your back. Because if you do, you will create the environment in which solution can come. If you keep standing up for yourself, and a lot of vets say to me, but Debra, how can I let them say these things to me? I said, if they're not true, rest in the idea that you know what the truth is. And if they are true, maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you didn't make it perfectly clear. There's a vet today who called me. The one problem that she had is she left this orthopedic recovery 3 weeks without a call. And I said to her, so what would you do differently? She goes, I would have called every week. I said, well, that's something you might want to share with them when you have this conversation mediation. After you listen to them, it might be something you share with them. So if you don't rise to the bait, but you look at the facts, you might actually learn something. So I think I'm coming to the end of my time, Catherine. Did I do a good job? Did I keep in my time? Thank you. My time frame.
Minutes left if you want it. But
oh, I have 3 more minutes left.
Well, but I'd love to open it up for questions because that's now where.
So there you go. Those 3 minutes are gone.
Right, exactly. No, because I think we're having really good engagement. I think in terms of people listening. So.
Up, Jeff's raising his hand.
So my question, Debra, this is great. It's very simple and very elegant. What are the most effective, or what's an effective way for a practice to equip their staff to be conflict competent? What are some models or approaches you've seen that really work?
Well, the most effective one is to bring someone in to ask the staff how they see the practice addressing conflict and having them be honest. Because it's really important that everybody's on the same page. And I know there are a lot of companies out there who come in and do, you know, addressing conflict and things like that. But quite frankly, listening to your staff and making sure you have the ability to either have them report, have them update, have them let you know what went right and went wrong. I mean, your staff are your eyes and your ears. If you don't have a process in place every week where you check in and see, A, are you doing okay, Jeff? And B, what have you observed in our clients? That's a real issue. And I know it takes time, and I know that time is money, and I know that you want to see more clients. Yeah. But really, in the scheme of things, in my practice, we go in and we set up these times that are very short, but very able to cover what's going on. And we give people the 2 or 3 skills they need to identify, to communicate, and then to assist in resolution. So if you see something, say something is taken to a greater degree in the practice when you allow for people to report. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I'm thinking that those same things would apply to inter-staff conflict. I mean, it's basically checking in, equipping them with skills, and then making sure that you're having dialogue around what's working and what isn't working.
Even more so, because if you can't communicate with your staff, you can't communicate with your client. As I said, your staff are your eyes and your ears. If they don't have skin in the game, i.e. if they don't feel respected, then you're not going to hear that your client's left angry. And you really want to know your client's left angry 5 minutes after your clients walked out. It would be better.
So all we're gonna say is those people who need to leave that they can will continue the conversation. You got Brenda and I both like this.
Yeah, man, it was like dual zeros.
On my Mac is 1 minute behind Catherine, so I was ready. I was going to be ready this time.
So I will say though, we're continuing the conversation, but we always want to make sure.
Yeah, I haven't finished all my Cosmo yet. And the answers get better at the end of the Cosmo.
Exactly, right.
Additional questions or thoughts? Do you have something?
I have a question.
Sure, Karen.
Hi. So it's actually this is my first time doing this, and it's really interesting that this is the topic because I found your stop, drop, and roll somewhere on the internet months ago, and I used it. I used it in a staff presentation about conflict resolution back in July, and it went over great. It was wonderful. And I guess my question is, it's something we've been working on actively here for a few months, and I've been pushing on really hard, and there's a couple people that it's just, no matter what, it is just not getting through.
Okay, so Karen, I'm so glad you brought that up because stop, drop, and roll is a really good jumping off point. Stop talking, listen, drop the needs to be right, and let what's it. But then you go to the next level, which is exploring perception and perspective. So have a team meeting about how they define perception and perspective, because what you're bringing to the table, you as Karen has to decide and understand what you're bringing to the table, and then each of your colleagues need to know that as well. So you can only stop, drop, and roll if you know what you're bringing to the table. And so making sure that it was funny, I gave a talk on this to a staff, and the older people were so not into examining their perspective and perception. They're like, this is work. Why aren't you telling us the 3 things we need to do to get it done? And I said, because the only way the 3 things you need to do can get done is if you know where you're coming from. Jeff will hold this out because I know this was part of what he was talking about at the conference. If you don't know what you're bringing to the table, then you can't really have a conversation that's going to be effective with anyone else. So you really have to do some internal searching about how you're approaching conflict, meaning you and your staff. So that's perception and perspective. And then taking time to understand that other parties have other perceptions and perspective. And that's where stop, drop, and roll can be sort of tweaked and focused to really not only talk about, conflicts with clients, but how I'm viewing Karen and how I'm viewing Brenda and how Brenda's different today than she was yesterday, maybe because she had a fight with her husband, maybe because she had a fight with her kid, maybe because she got stuck in traffic. And so giving them the opportunity to share that with you is really important when you're applying stop, drop, and roll. But don't forget to email me. I'm sure the girls will let you know, and I'll be happy to help you go forward with that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
That was a great question, by the way. And Jeff,
it was absolutely a great question.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy.
And I have to say too, I mean, and Jody can probably relate to this as well. We're talking about practice, but this is so applicable to everyday life, whether you're talking about dealing with the other little league parents or in your corporate office. It's very practical.
I did mention PTA, right? I did mention I survived PTA. This is where this came from.
Yeah, which is sandlot compared to when you get into sports. With your kids. But
it's unbelievable. If somebody posted, don't complain unless you volunteer. And I said, well, that's really good. I said, but really the difference is if somebody complains, instead of saying, well, just go volunteer, no, say, that is a really, really great observation. Now, let's see, do you have any ideas how we might implement that? And I'd love to put you in charge of implementing that because it would be such a great change in this office. And I'm happy to support you or have somebody else support you. but that's a really great change. And how do you think we're going to effectuate that? Because don't say, are you kidding me? We're going to have 3 meetings a week. You must be kidding. Say, that's a great, give me an idea of how you're going to effectuate that. It's important. It's important to make sure that if people have really great ideas that you think stink, that you ask them to help you figure out how, and that's perspective and perception again. You think they stink. Ask them how that might work out and how they might implement that. And believe me, they will either run with their hair on fire, or they will figure it out and it will really support you and your staff and your clients. It's amazing.
Quick question.
Yes.
Hi, Deborah, how you doing?
Hey, Kimmy, how is Fiji?
Yeah. So I get, and I've seen in action, the benefits of diffusing the anger in the situation with stop, drop, and roll. And I think that we all know that a big component of the anger is actually just not being heard. But sometimes, or how many times is it, well, my real question is, how do you then, once there's been this de-escalation of emotions and story and stuff, how do you recommend then things be ended? In terms of, I know you said that, okay, sometimes they come back and apologize, but you know, certainly if you have something to enact as a hospital policy, that might be a good thing to say, but you don't want to necessarily give money back or do this, that, and the other. You know, it's kind of, especially if you agree to disagree, but we've diffused the situation, and you can say thank you for your information. I feel that there's always, I mean, maybe I should just learn to shut it there, but I just kind of feel like are they expecting more?
Well, you know what I have found? So along the same lines of, if they come up with a really good idea, ask them to do it. When you're having a conflict with a client, everybody wants money back. I'm so not a money giver backer. I don't think that solves the problem. I think that just throws, you know, gasoline on the fire, because then they think they can do that every time they come to a practice. You know, so I'm just going to complain and then they'll take $100 off. I mean, my vet lives her life that way. She, you know, if somebody complains, she gives them their money back. And I go, how does that work as a business model? I just need to know how that works, because I would be out of business. What you want to do is, at the end of the conversation, say, we've had a really great conversation here today, and you've given me a lot of food for thought. Before we figure out the resolution, I'd love to take a break. I would love to look at our schedules and see if we can meet again. And then figure out what we're going to do next. And so you meet maybe 3 or 4 days later, and they've had time to cool down, and you've had time to cool down. They don't want to choke them to death because they want all their money back. You know, you've got to cool, you know, perspective, perception. You have to cool down too. I mean, even though you're the most calm person I know, but then you say to them, listen, it seems to me that you have some really great points that you've made here. And I'd like to know if you would like to either be a part of figuring out how to shift this, give me some ideas that I can implement, and then I can keep you abreast of the implementation and see if it's working. I would love to know. Because if people are part of the solution, I always point to Penn State and the poor family that lost their young son at the frat party who fell down the stairs. Mm-hmm. So who has the deeper pocket there, Penn State or the fraternity? Penn State. Penn State offered the parents condolences and asked them to come aboard and help them figure out how to never have this happen again. They're not suing Penn State. They're suing the fraternity who circled the wagons. So if you choose to circle the wagons at the end of the conversation because this person is crazy, it's one way to go. But it's going to not necessarily diffuse it in a way where your practice is going to benefit. Despite what you may think, this person might have an idea that might work. And despite the fact that you would hate to think that Catherine has an idea because you think she's crazy that you should implement, if that's an idea that when you implement it, it makes sense, then you have to suck it up and go. And bring them along, because it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So kind of diffuse, then re-adjourn and see what solutions they may be interested in volunteering or
suggesting for you to do, and then see if they work. and then give them feedback. You know, you said that you might think this or this or this would work. You know, we've implemented 3 of them. This one really worked well. These 2, because of time and constraints, they didn't. But we want to really appreciate the fact that you told us, you know, putting pink slips in the card to know that people, you know, can't hear, or whatever it is that it was that they gave you. You know, making them feel as if they're part of the solution is so much better than giving them money. I now have a case where I'm trying to make the person, I'm trying to suggest to the person that they want to be part of the solution, as opposed to just wanting money back, because the solution would be so much more impactful to the practice than just being paid off.
Mm.
Craziness.
It's really important to include people in the solution, and not just for money. Most people, the only reason they ask for money is because I had a vet stand up at CSU when I was teaching there, and he said, you know, all they want is money back. I said, what else do you offer them?
That's a good one.
What else do you offer them? You don't offer them to come and speak to the staff and say, this is how you treated me, and train the staff to understand that this is a listening event, not a defend yourself event. Because it just is about listening. How did perception and perspective, how did you come over to this person who may be a lunatic, right? But you always learn more, right, Jeff? You always learn more from the complainer than you do from the go-along guy. The guy who gets along with everybody at the practice, you don't learn anything from.
Right.
The guy who just, you know, sticks the stick in the spoke of the wheel, those you learn a lot from.
I love the comment you made there about bringing them, right, making them part of the solution, not only challenging them to be part of the solution, but asking them how to be part of the solution. I think that's fantastic. So what do you do when you offer that solution, and especially when it's an employee, for example, when you offer them that solution, they continue to be detrimental to the overall practice? I think probably everyone has witnessed that at some point in their career along the way. When do you know when it's time to just draw that line?
Well, that's the keep, you know, address it again and say, listen, Brenda, we are so grateful that we've had this conversation with you. We're so glad we had this conversation. We appreciate having this conversation, whatever word works for you. Some people say, I'm not grateful for talking to Brenda. Okay, fine, then don't use that word. It's just a word that comes out of my mouth. But whatever you want to use, say, I'm so glad we had this conversation, and I see that, you know, we've made some strides here. Again, going with the positive first, and we still need to make strides here. What do you think? Because if they still keep sticking the spoke in the wheel just because they like to see the wheel stop, then you need to sit down with them and say, okay, so we've sat down now 3 times. I mean, 3 times the charm. If they're not going to get it after 3 times, then you might, you know, AKA. If you're not going to keep them, let them go happy. Let them go and say, it just seems to me that we are not meeting your needs. We're not meeting your needs because of the fact that you know, these things that we've talked about for the last 3 months or the last 3 weeks or whatever it was, we haven't been able to figure out how to do this. How might we ask you to figure out how to do it? Or would you prefer to find a place that would, and we'll be happy to send you on your way with a recommendation.
Yeah.
You know, there is oil and vinegar out there, and, you know, you'll know it when you see it. It's sort of like pornography. That's what I learned in law school. The judge wrote, I think, in the decision, I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. Okay. It was the joke in law school, just so you know. I'll know it when I see it. So.
Oh, that's funny.
So back to the front when we asked, are you getting the, you know, when you signed up for this, what were you hoping to, you know, garner from it as you were going forward? I mean, Karen obviously has been fortunate enough to apply the stop, drop, and roll in her practice, and then getting to hear from the whole darn thing is kind of helpful. But is there anything else that you guys were really hoping that we would cover?
Yeah, please ask me.
For the evening.
Really appreciate it, Deborah.
No worries, because you know, as we sign up, just remember, conflict is a 2-way street. So if you can, when you're ready to strangle someone, take a minute and ask where you are. I mean, I always say, if I could do that when I'm fighting with my husband, I'd be a much better resolver of conflicts. But when you're heated, it's hard to take a beat on where you are. But if you could do that, and you can have the presence of mind to stop and just say, you know, I'm just not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to let them go down the rabbit hole all by themselves. And then I'm going to ask them, what can I do to help, or what can you do to help me understand why you're where you are?
Yeah.
Jody, you unmuted. Did you have something a comment?
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I just want to make sure.
I just always appreciate hearing the other words that people use and the other approaches, because it's right now in society, I got to be the winner and I got to throw down and beat you up. so that whole idea that you were talking about, of talking to the staff about, you are right. You know, whatever it takes for me to get in that frame of mind to say, I'm right, doesn't matter if they know it or not, and then move on. I mean, that's something we work with our staff on a lot of the time. You know, whether it's somebody at the front desk who's dealing with a neighbor who doesn't like something we're doing, or somebody who's, you know, tube of product exploded, maybe because they were using it wrong. But yeah, I just so appreciate hearing the different approaches, because this, you know, just, it evolves all the time. I mean, the formula for diffusing is core the same, but there are all of these techniques and things people get sick of hearing. If somebody apologizes me for the inconvenience one more time, I will throw up on them. But there are way better ways to say it, as you've proved tonight.
Yeah, and when you drop the need to be right, recognize that just let it go. Don't say, well, I'm right, and so I don't care what you have to say. Don't do that. Just say, you know, I am right, and I'm going to listen to why they think they're right. Because if you can drop the need to be right, you can hear what they're saying. So I always say, listen for understanding instead of reply.
I have a kind of follow-up
Sure.
question to what
Sure,
Jody said,
absolutely.
if that's, we have time.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I still have a little.
What
I
you mentioned
refilled my.
about, you did refill, yeah. So what you mentioned about, you know, we live in a society that's like, you got to win all the time. And I'm sure that this is exacerbated by the fact that I'm a woman and I look a lot younger than I am, you know, and, you know, it's something that I get a lot when I'm promoting these techniques is this look immediately of like, you're soft, you're weak, you know, and it's a hard thing for me to get through to. It's not such a problem in client communications, because usually that works out no problem, but especially with my staff, especially with the older veterinarians that I'm working with, is that kind of like getting through that this is not weakness, this is effective communication, this is, you know, but it's really, especially coming from the position of being a young woman, it's hard to get that across.
Well, that is such a perfect question, because being a young woman or being a young staff member on any level, the older veterinarians, I'm older, so I can say this, think they know everything. I'm an older attorney, I think I know everything. The way in which to handle that effectively is to say, you know, Dr. Hamilton, or however you refer to them, I get it. This is really new stuff. And believe me, it was really new for me too, to try to figure this out. But tell me what you perceive when I say this, what your perception is when I say this, or when I offer this as an explanation. Tell me what you're thinking, because I really want to understand, you know, why it is this might not really seem effective to you, because you might be right. Your perception might be perfect. Have you ever, Karen, done anything that didn't work?
Sure.
You know, and so take ownership of it and say, you know, I thought that would work and it didn't, but, you know, try again. When at first you don't succeed, try again. And that's how practices evolve. And if you put it that way, tell me what your perception of this is to the older vets, because then you'll understand what their thinking is. When they try to make you feel like you're too young, or you don't know what you're doing, or it's not going to work, say, I get it. Could you just tell me a little bit more about why you feel that way?
Okay.
Because then you'll understand their perspective, and it might explain to you why they feel that way, because they might have done it that way 10 years ago. It didn't work. But 10 years ago is 10 years ago, and now and we're with people now, and it might work now. And if it didn't work last time, say, oh, I'm so glad you told me that, Jeff. Now, what went wrong? What did you perceive went wrong, and how might it have gone better had we done it differently, and what differently might we do now to make it go better? Because what you want to do is you want to engage them in the solution instead of having them throw rocks, which they're doing. They're throwing rocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah, this has been great. I mean, very lots of good, useful, meaty information.
So with
Yeah.
that, we are at 7:45 or 7:44 if you've got Brenda's computer and my computer.
And of course, in New York, that's 8:45.
There you go. Yeah,
Miller time.
much later. But this has been fantastic, and I have to say I was very geeked about my conversation I had with Deb last night, and then tonight she's even provided more context and more insight into it. And I'm probably going to put it up on my computer. I mean, I think that the notion is the worst thing is on the phone. And when, you're disagreeing with someone and finding out that, wait, is my tension starting to rise when I could simply diffuse this very, very quickly. And oftentimes it could be because time is moving too fast, et cetera. So these will be little notes that I will be having underneath my monitor over here that I think will be really helpful. So what I'd love to be able to do is have everybody raise their glass, and for all of us to thank our host, Debra, for being here tonight. I think we all got a great piece of advice, and to stop, drop, and roll. All right, cheers, everybody.
All for inviting me. Cheers.
Have a great evening.
All right.